Welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast, episode 155. Today on the podcast, Jen interviews Tony Dottino, management consultant and host of the Infinitely Expandable Brain podcast, which explores how you can use the untapped power of your brain to transform your life, your relationships, and your career. I'm pretty sure I have an infinitely expandable brain. How else could I explain never being able to find any of the things I put in there?
Hey there, welcome to the Careers by Jen podcast. This is Jen Swanson, and this is the show that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. I am looking forward to bringing you this conversation with Tony Dottino, and Tony is a listener of the Careers by Jen podcast and reached out to me a little while ago to ask a few questions about the show and to share all the work that he is doing. So I'm happy to be bringing you our conversation. I think we could have spoken for another hour because we had so many things that were converging with the work that he does in healthcare and my background in healthcare and all of that. So I'm sure that we will talk again at some point, and I hope that you really enjoy this conversation about how emotional intelligence is important. And in the work that I'm doing, I know that with the employers that I speak to, emotional intelligence is sometimes the deciding factor. So it's a really important topic, something to think about, and I hope you enjoy our conversation. So welcome to the show, Tony. It's so great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm looking forward to the time that we have to share today. Give your audience a couple of tips that may be helpful and make a difference in their lives.
That sounds fantastic. Before we get into that, though, I'd like you to tell us a little bit about how it is you came to be doing the work that you're doing now.
I was executive at IBM and spent almost 28 years there. And we were at a point where I was talking with my CFO and a few of the directors in a huddle talking about we were losing the creativity of the IBM workforce. And I always remember growing up through the time of Thomas Watson Jr. and John Akers of always talking about the power of IBM was in the power of the individual and each person's creativity. And it was the sum of those people doing each of their own thing and having their own passion and their own enthusiasm that really made IBM terrific and made it what it was. Unfortunately, we wrote that book and then I think we threw it away. And as we threw it away, we created panic and anxiety and fear and did all of the wrong emotional reactions at a time when you needed people's creativity at its peak and their emotional commitment and buy-in to what needed to be happening in the company and meet and deal with its competitors. We lost the power of the individual. So I shared that with my CFO, and at one point, a couple of weeks later, his secretary is calling me into his office, and I'm like, oh God, what did I do? And he says, look, I know you've been talking about creativity, and we've got to get people's passion and energy back. Here's a seminar going to be given in New York City. It's a 3-day seminar. Why don't we get 4 of us and why don't we go down and see what this neuroscientist is going to be talking about? And so off we went, New York City in 3 days and 3 nights. And I met this man that was talking about the 1990s would become the decade of the brain. And that George Bush Sr. had declared the 90s as the decade of the brain. And I was always one of these people that thought I wasn't using all of my brain. So, gee, what can I find out about what the research is showing? And what this instructor was saying is that more than half of what we thought we knew about our own thinking and our own emotions would be proven to be wrong in the next 10 years. And I was like, whoa, some of what I'm doing is wrong in the way I think and the way I feel about things. Can I find out what that research is and figure out how to make changes in my own life? And as I started to do that, I was like I became an educator. I became teacher. It's like you need to know this. Like, here are things that we are learning that people need to know about. And so I got what I call my little boy about it, and I got real excited, and I got my own emotional energy behind it. And I wanted to go out and teach this to as many people as I can. And so that was the launch of what I got to start doing. And so I started doing it in the IBM company, and it would energize people. It would get them back engaged. And then I decided through my son's coaching, Dad, it's time for you to leave IBM and go start your own business. So in 1994, I left the IBM company. I was one of these folks that when they put one of their offerings, I put my hand up and say, I'll go. And they paid me to leave, which was great. And then for 2 years, they hired me back as a consultant, which was pretty silly. But because I had skills that they needed. And one of the things that I learned during that period of time is in your creative process, first you need to have some energy. You have to have enthusiasm. You have to have some excitement. You have to have passion. And you also have to have some experience. And so what I've learned in the brain research is when you're really trying to hit people in the creative brain, you've got to have the energy to drive it, but you also have the experience. And so what I was sharing with our senior executives at the time is we're letting the wrong people go. Unfortunately, too many companies run what I call the numbers games, and too many people don't realize they have these gifts that they can be given if they just would learn how to speak the boss's lingo. And so these were the things that got me started, launched, my career in consulting. And now I've been 1993. So what is this now? 25 years almost of going out. And I always tell people, if you just stop and watch people and really pay attention to what they're saying, what they're doing, and look at them, it's amazing what you can learn by just sitting on a chair and observing.
Right. And you started a podcast. When did that start?
The podcast started probably about 6 months ago. So I started to take some of my success stories of people that were in different leadership positions and had them share the lessons and tips. And what's been amazing is it's been a wide diversity of people, men and women. And, I think I'm teaching a consistent level of skills throughout each of my workshops. And yet each of my podcast members have had different tips and different points of things that I've taught them that have really helped them be successful in their work. And that is, I just listened to it as somebody just sent me an email and said, I've been listening to your podcast and I want to use the tips that I'm getting from these in my college training programs that I do. And he says, I couldn't find a better summary of tips and suggestions, and each one of them has got new gems in it. And so the podcast is turning out to be fun. I'm learning things about clients that I've worked with that are just amazing. So, for example, one CEO I've been dealing with is all about people, and I'm about people. So where I can make a difference in people's lives, sign me up. And so I'm talking to him and I'm saying, Tim, what is giving you the background to be so open to what people have got to say in your organization and the contributions they make? And he said, I was a pastor, and I was, after years and years of being a pastor, I decided to change my career, and I moved into being an administrator at hospitals. And I realized if I wasn't going to listen to people at the front line, I was not going to be a successful administrator. And so it just became a natural tendency for me to open up the doors for people to talk to me and have enough of trust that they could tell me exactly what was going on in their mind. And that's totally consistent with what you teach. And so what you help me do is build an organization where people don't have the fear, or they're not in this anxiety or phobic concern of retribution of speaking the truth. And so it's one of the most powerful things, and yet it's very rewarding because when people have the freedom and they don't have the emotional barriers or chains to be able to say what they really want to say, it's empowering. It's empowering for them as individuals, but it's extraordinarily empowering for the organization and what it can create.
Absolutely. Well, let's jump right into our topic then and get at some of this stuff. Our topic today is how developing your emotional intelligence will empower you at work. Can you start by explaining what EQ or emotional intelligence is?
I have a very, very simple way of looking at this, and it comes from a lot of the research I've done on our brain. And this is what I've studied now since I went to the seminar in '89. I'm subscribing to all kinds of medical newsletters, and they come out of Harvard and Hopkins and Cleveland Clinic, and people look at my mailbox and say, "How do you absorb all this stuff?" But let me get back to your question. There are two parts of our brain that are engaged all the time. One is our cortex, the left and right brain, and it's looking at things and hearing things and observing them and saying, okay, can I be making sense out of all of this? And is this rational? And should my brain be looking at this and finding it to be logical? And that's part of the way we go about living our lives and our actions. But I was fascinated to read a book by Dr. Joseph Ledoux out of NYU in New York City, what Daniel Goleman wrote his books about emotional intelligence. And Ledoux made it really simple for me. He said, there are 13 different emotional responses that we can have to a given situation. As we see, hear, touch, feel, we can go from a level of we're excited, we're enthused, we're passionate about something, or in the reverse, we can fear it, we can be angry about it, we can be phobic about it, and a third level, we can just have no feelings about it, we can be apathetic. So when I think of emotional intelligence, I put this scale of these 13 different things that Ledoux talks about in his research, and I start with, in people's lives, can I find something that lights them up, that you can see in their eyes, you can see in their facial expressions, that they just kind of beam like the radiance of a bright sunny day? Or do I see a frown or a fear or something that you can see in their facial expressions that just kind of withdraws their radiance and just kind of pulls it back in? And then look, for me, you can find me stressed. You look at my ears and my chin, and you can just see that just kind of tighten in and say, okay, he's having this TMJ attack right now, and his jaw is just chomping on his teeth, and he's grinding them, as the dentist tells me, and having a tough emotional stress and things. So I've got a few things right now in my life that are causing me some stress, but I become mindful of, when you say EQ, emotional intelligence, is am I aware of my emotions in given situations, to where I'm either excited, passionate, and enthused about something, or there's something that's got me in a stress, or has got me in a fear, or a phobic, where I'm making stuff up, and I'm making up stories. And so it's that scale of Ledoux's of the 13 different emotions that I use to define people's emotional intelligence. And so I make it simple for people. What is it that excites you, that touches your heart, that really gives you a purpose that you feel that you can connect to, that would really ignite the infinite thinking capacity of the biology of your brain? And on the reverse side, what is something that would so lock you down and so paralyze you in a state of fear or anger that it would inhibit your ability to tap into your cortex and uncover that infinite creativity of the human brain? So that's how I look at EQ. And I've seen so many different definitions and sessions of it, but I say, based on Ledoux's research, you got 1 to 13 you can pick from, so pick it.
So if a person is considering making a career move and has, not paid a lot of attention to the EQ factor, I know that in the work that I do, that employers are looking for emotional intelligence, although they don't always have a fantastic way of determining whether or not the candidate has, where they are on that scale. But I know that cultural fit is a big thing now in the hiring process. And I just wonder what a person who's thinking of making a career move could do, what practical steps they could take to work on their EQ.
You have just nailed this. Like, Jen, you will split the apple in 3 different parts 3 times with the shot with that question.
Oh, good.
Because here's what's crucial about it, and you've really nailed it, is, first of all, as you're thinking about switching your careers and you're going for interviews. So let's talk about, you're switching your career, you've got this, and now you're going to go for an interview. Do you know what the culture that you're going into is all about? what drives their energy levels? What are the things that drive their enthusiasm? What are the things that inspire their employees? And so as you're searching out a company for a new position and you're looking at a career change, the first part is okay, wherever you're going to go for that interview, you really need to know what that culture is all about and what are the values or what are the pieces of the culture that they value most. And so years ago, I helped my son get a job in Disney. There were 100 applications for a finance manager job in Disney. And so I like to do some work on Disney. And so teamwork inspired them. So are you a collaborator? Are you somebody that innovates? So guess what his resume had within it? Where had he, applying for this job, where did he collaborate with things? Where did he inspire people to do things that were outside their comfort zone? Where did he demonstrate his own innovation and creativity? Where did he demonstrate that, he was a team player and was always focused on what was best for the organization? And so we locked his resume up to match those points, and eventually he got a terrific position. He had just about a 20-year career with Disney, and he's just 3 weeks ago has joined DCG, and he's now working with me, and I'm just thrilled to be working with my son, who's helped me so much with that. So that's one area you found. Number two, does the organization even have that well defined? So the other side of that is, as you're going in, I see so many people that are going into organizations where the organization hasn't defined the elements of its culture and how it identifies its own emotional intelligence and what are the things that are most important to it. And so you wind up so often with a person now going to apply for a job. So we'll talk about that yet, about the person who's going to apply for the job. Well, we've talked about what the values of the company are, but we've also said there are some companies that have not defined those values. And I mean, what are the most critical factors that as you're coming into a culture, that the culture has defined an employee coming in here must be able to do these 3 or 4 things. And if you can't do these 3 or 4 things, then you're not going to sustain a career and you're not going to have the career growth that you may expect, and you do it. And so let me give you one. I'm seeing a lot in the hospital work that I do. Nurses, young ladies and men and women are going through nursing school. And they come out of the nursing school, and now you go to a hospital and you get a job. And in this job, one of the critical factors that hospitals are being paid for is what they call the patient experience. And if you don't have high patient experience results, hospitals are losing millions of dollars.
Yep.
So a new GN comes out of school. And what does she learn in school? How to keep people alive, how to take their blood pressure, how to give them their meds. She's learned all of the clinical aspects of how to be a good nurse. But what has she learned about interpersonal intelligence and skills, which is another way of saying, what has she learned about reading people's emotions? And what has she learned about maintaining and staying in focus of her own? So I cannot tell you how many new nurses I have that, first of all, have a hard time building that emotional connection with a patient because they're so focused on keeping the patient alive. And so when they go home at the end of the night, I can't tell you how many of my they're so stressed and they go home and cry because they worry about what did they or not do that might have hurt or harmed the patient. The second part of that is how do they manage that so that they stay in a career? So you see in some hospitals extraordinarily high turnover rates because of the lack of understanding of the emotional intelligence, first of the institution and what they're expecting of their workers, and on the second side, not giving the workers, in this case nurses, what I call hugs and hand-holding and the love that they need to try to sustain bringing some new interpersonal skills to the table. But there's one other part that I want to touch at, which is the third piece of this triangle I'm trying to answer, which is, as I said, a great question. And that is, does a person that's deciding to leave a position and seek new employment of some sort, do they understand what platform they need to jump onto? And do they have something under their feet that can sustain them for about a 6-month period of time so that as they go out and they seek this new employment, the one mistake I see too many people make is they are so stressed over their current job that they think that anything is better than showing up for work every day. And what they do is they jump before they have a platform to jump onto. And they don't have their own emotions in check other than the fact that they hate or dislike where they're at, and they know they're not happy. But as I've said to my son, when he was thinking about leaving his position and coming to work with me, I said, not until I feel that we have a strong foundation, because the last thing I want you to jump into is an ocean of sharks that will make this such a miserable experience that you think you were having a bad experience where you were. Boy, wait till you see the experience you have when finding a job becomes a stress when you can't pay your bills.
Right. Right. And there, you've said so much here that I'm trying to think of where to start. One of the things I used to teach is human relations skills in healthcare in a college. And the students that I was teaching were going into hospitals, not as nurses, but as nursing unit clerks or health unit coordinators. It's the same job. And we were given 30 hours to teach human relations skills, which is ridiculous. There's absolutely no way in 30 hours that you can even skim the surface of what needs to be taught, which is why I wrote the book that I wrote, that was meant to address the gap in that very thing, and not specifically healthcare, although I use a lot of examples of healthcare in the book. But it was one of the things that was the hardest, and I appreciate that you said that it isn't only for the patients and the clients that the worker is dealing with, but for the worker themselves, because that not dealing with that will lead to burnout very quickly.
And it's happening, in hospitals. Right now, I've been focused recently on healthcare and different challenges in the healthcare world. And very, very often, as new people are coming into the org, I call it, you need to have a buddy. You need to find out who can you go out and have a cup of coffee with, or who can you go out and have lunch with, that becomes your support arm, or that becomes somebody you can just talk to, and not in a therapeutical way, but somebody who just you can vent to and you can listen and let them hear what you're saying and say, you know what, you're going to be okay, or who can give them a hug. And what I'm finding, and this is, your question touches me, because it's not just in frontline workers that are feeling this stress and this strain, but the higher up you go organization. I had one CEO recently said, Tony, I'm a people too. And it was enlightening, because what he was telling me is I got to go to a board of trustees. I got to go to the community centers and things. I'm meeting with the governmental officials on a regular basis. I meet with different boards that check and balance the clinical practices of the hospital. Do you have any idea what stress and pressures that I'm under? And it was impacting his health. I mean, and he was new to a position that is loaded with problems and challenges. And I say, I don't care what level you are in an organization. If you could get a senior executive team and then their middle management team and a group of frontline workers to sit around the table and just talk about what you're covering here today, you would have one heck of a powerful conversation. But here's the problem with that, right? And work that I do with doctors, they don't let that go, and they don't release that tension and pressure, and they sure don't share it with anybody, because, as they well put it, people think I'm God, and I have to be perfect. And when you put yourself, and I don't care who you are, you can be a frontline person, you can be a person, when you put yourself into a position where you think you've got to be perfect, you have set yourself up for one heck of an anxiety attack.
Absolutely. So what advice could you give someone in a position like that who maybe is not getting the opportunity from their employer to deal with this? What can a person individually do to become more aware and be able to handle these kinds of situations?
One of the simplest things that people say I should write a book just on what we call gig, garbage in, garbage grows, and keeping your scorecard balanced. Let me tell you what that means. Our brain has this thinking capacity. So if I said to you right now, Jen, I want you to take a 5-second pause and shut your brain off and have it not think. And so if we pause for 5 seconds, just in the act of you trying not to think, guess what? You're thinking. Your brain is working 24/7. I am sure your whole audience can tell you at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, at 7, 8, 9, and they are thinking, and sometimes driving to work, coming home, taking a walk. Boy, their brain's working all the time. But here's what we get to choose, and one of the things in emotional IQ is about self-awareness. And one of the things I teach people that they've got to be self-aware of is what position is their G in. Now, what do I mean? Because our brain is thinking within itself all the time, your first position G can be stuck on garbage in, garbage will grow. In television commercials, you see garbage in is garbage out, but your brain is not one for one. It's synergistic, meaning it's thinking all the time. So one new thought into your brain, good or bad, generates a garbage dump if it's stuck in the garbage position. In kind, from an emotional point of view, you can balance the scorecard out and you can change that first position to and good in and good will grow. And I've had clients that have had the audacity and the boldness and their emotional passion for what they're trying to achieve that have changed that first position to greatness in and greatness will grow. So what can your audience do? The first thing they should do is to stop and think about what are the most influential things that they listen to, observe, read, people they talk to that influence their first position G. Meaning, are they talking to people that are telling them about the world is awful and go hide in a cave? If I was never aware of that from my emotional level, I would have been living in a cave because my mom was somebody who just thought people were evil. She was a cynic. She lived in fear. Now, Jen, I didn't throw my mom away. Okay,
No, I don't either.
But what I became more aware of is where was mom influencing my thinking. And as I became more aware of that, I would have these conversations where I would have to be consciously aware of in one ear and out the other, which kids are good at with their parents when they're told not to do something. But the point was, what music was I listening to? And was that music that was inspiring and passionate and generating energy? So I started to listen to the words. I'm not always conscious about words and music, but I started to pay attention to the words and the music that I listened to. And people were getting killed, and people's relationships were not lasting, and they were breaking up, and there was heartache, and there was heart pain. And I'm like, this is the music I listen to in my car driving back and forth to work. I started to think about the books that I was reading. So what books was I reading? Somebody said to me one day, gee, you read all these great sports books, and you're going to be a sports announcer someday. And I said, no. And then the question, well, why am I reading those books? So when I tell people, especially those who are looking for new jobs, what books are you reading that make you an expert on the profession that you're seeking out? And you better have at least 10 books on your bibliography, because if you're not at least reading 10 different books on the topic of your expertise or your importance, by golly, you got some work to do. Are you listening to people? Are you listening to people on television? Or are you listening to people in the field that you're trying to go to on television and speaking? And so you talk about emotional intelligence. So I'm watching CBS 60 Minutes there in New York City one day and watching it on Sunday night after football. And here's the owner of the Steak Shack restaurants who's teaching his workers, you need to know at any given table in the restaurant, who is the person at that table that is driving the emotions for the whole group.
Interesting.
And you need to key in on that person.
Huh.
Now you're telling that to a restaurant worker, okay? And you're telling them, okay, who at the table is the person driving the emotions, and that's who you're going to key in on. Where is anybody teaching that stuff? Now, mind you, this guy's restaurants are exploding. He's extremely successful. He's got fundamentals. He's all over what you're talking about in terms of emotions and how they impact a person's experience in a restaurant. Now, who's thinking about that?
Exactly.
Now you want to be a server in a restaurant, or you want to go work in a restaurant. Some servers in restaurants make some pretty darn good money.
Absolutely.
And so are they servers who have made connections with people on an emotional level? And that's the thing that's really important to it. You are on some topics. I just want to close the gig thing up. So we talked about music. What about TV programs? What TV programs? When I'm working with kids and I'm trying to help them along with their studies, or anybody in college, what are you watching on television? And is that impacting your TVs? And I hate to go back and make this political, but I always remember Dan Quayle, many, many years ago, he was so harshly criticized for saying, if you watch some of the TV programs that we've got, they're destroying our values and what has made this country great. And all I tell people, look, you watch whatever television that you want to watch, but you need to be aware of what impact that television is having on the inputs to your brain. So I no longer, when I moved to Orlando, I got to tell you, I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and the news was awful. People were getting killed, murdered, raped, drugs. And I said, and I wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning and listen to this, and I expect to go out and have a great day. And in that same regard, I started to become mindful. I was a news junkie, right? 6 o'clock news. If I was home, I had to get the 10 o'clock news, and by 11, something else was changing. And then I got to go to bed and have a good night's rest. So I've become a real hawk for people to be very strong about what they watch on television or movies and how that impacts their emotions.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's important especially in our world today and all the stuff that's happening. And I just want to go back and say, my mom is an amazing person, and one of the things she does that I think helps to cope with all the news and all the stuff that makes her cynical, is that she paints. She has a creative outlet and paints these incredible, amazing scenes that are getting recognized. And so she's figured out a way to balance the in and out that you're talking about. And I also wanted to say, isn't there an old adage that says you're the sum of the 5 people you hang out with the most? That's the same kind of thing you're talking about.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I do work with the groups of people that you're talking about, okay, I got a job and I'm going to leave. Well, who's influencing your thinking inside of that? Well, I'm going to leave the job and go somewhere else. Okay, well, who's going to influence that decision, and what skills have you built that are going to make you a most improved product that you go sell to, that you're going to go sell to? And what training seminars are you going to that are bringing you to the latest and the most up-to-date things? So now what does all that have to do with emotional intelligence? One simple technique I learned: before you get up and speak to a group, before you go out and take an interview, you got to know your subject. And if you know your subject, you'll have the confidence, you'll have the trust, you'll be able to communicate that effectively, and all you got to do then is be yourself. And it's amazing about what people that can be themselves and lock in on the energy and the passion that they so innately possess, with just giving them the confidence of the skills of being an expert on the field that they're going to or the field that they're currently in. What a world of difference that makes in how they project themselves. And I say, and they throw away the tin cup. Now, what do I mean by the tin cup? This cup that they hold in their hands that so parallels them because they're sticking it in front of people gets thrown away, and they become who they want to be and project that in a very confident and assuring way to where they don't need that cup anymore.
So people need to, first of all, know the culture of the place that they're applying to and how the values of that place play out, to tailor their materials, their resume and their cover letter and everything to that. They need to be aware of the negativity and the things that they're taking in and balance that with positive stuff. I'm just summing up here a little bit,
No, that's great.
and then people need to be aware of who they're hanging out with, who they've got around them, and to be able to know their subject well enough that they can be authentic and be authentically themselves.
You have summarized this very well. God, I wish I could have expressed it so well. I get so excited and passionate about wanting to teach people things that I want. I get sometimes some feedback that says, God, you've given me a fire hose. It's all great, but I can't drink it that fast.
Well, your passion is evident in your voice, Tony.
Because I love what I do, and I am passionate about it because I see the difference it can make in people's lives. And this podcast and the questions you've asked clearly says to me, you're on top of this. And if you can impact your audience with just the questions you've raised today and bounce those questions back to them, and can they answer those questions in terms of, so what is the drive in their life that taps into their infinite creativity? What, again, I don't like to use it, the purpose. What is your life's purpose? No. What is there something in your life where you can make a difference in someone else's life that by teaching them or by helping and aiding them, that can drive it? And I've been blessed in the number of different clients I've had where the people I've had the pleasure of working with, it's almost like they use the word, it's my calling. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like they've been called to do this work. And that's when you see people really tapping into their infinite abilities and loving what they do because they can see the difference that they're making in other people's lives, which to me is what it's about.
And you can tell when someone is in a role, in a position, because they are passionate and they're called to be there, and it's a vocation rather than a job.
You got it.
You can tell.
It shows up on our face, whether we like it or not. I've learned to study, especially when I'm rounding on patients or talking with customers or whatever. I've learned to study faces, and you'd be amazed if you just walked in on people's faces, what you can learn in terms of talking to them, studying their face as they respond to you.
Yes. I know that there are many things that are betrayed by the look on the face or the body language that the voice never says.
I'm not into what I call the full body language stuff because I myself, sometimes my back is hurting me or I'm pulling my arms because my hands are freezing cold. But I will tell you, in the finding, I founded the USA Memory Championship. I'm going to be doing my 20th event in 2018. And one of the events we had, which has been invaluable to me in my consulting work, is an event of you have to remember the names and the faces of 117 people. And you have 15 minutes to do it. But what I've learned from that, from some of the mental athletes, is what they study in the features of people's faces and link it to their name as a way to remember the face and the feature and the name of the person that goes with it. But one of my mental athletes taught me and said, and you can also tell if a person is lying to you by looking at those same features and whether or not they twitch, move, or stay static. So he taught me 8 of them. And so in those 8, when you're talking to someone, 2 things, you better, I always tell that, again, the new people going into interviews and tips to your audience, before you go an interview or before you go out the door to go to work or before you go to serve a customer, go look in a mirror. And when we're talking with nurses, we say, check it before you wreck it.
Meaning, I like it. Yeah.
Meaning, check your face before you're going to walk into a patient's room and see if it's a face that you would welcome into the room or just look like you're there to do the job or get your ticky mark for the chores. And so, again, you're touching on something that's extremely powerful, and that is, how are you projecting yourself? And so the simple technique I've learned to do is just quickly stop in a men's room, look in the mirror, and then say, uh-oh, I better stay here until I figure this out, or I better go take a quick 60-second walk in circles, but I better get out of the mode that I'm in if I'm going to go in and have a real conversation and make connections with people.
That's great advice, because it's so easy to carry your thought about your argument you had yesterday into into a space where it has no business being.
Totally. And we do it. The bad news about that is back to emotional intelligence. We do it not being self-aware.
Uh-huh.
When we're not self-aware of our own emotions sometimes is when we get into our most trouble.
Right. So what's one last piece of advice you have, Tony, for the listener?
It just triggered coming off of that, which is spatial. So self-awareness has got to be combined with spatial awareness. And that is when you're in the emotions of excitement, enthusiasm, and you're in other people's space, you're talking to them, are they in that same level of emotion? Are they connecting with you? Or it's like, wow, you're telling about all these great things and they just left the funeral parlor and they're in a whole different place. And therefore, connecting with people requires you to know what space are you in, and are they in that same space? Are they in that same emotional bonding or connection, or are you in happy land and they're in sad land? Or in reverse, are you in a stress state, and therefore whatever you're going to say or do is going to be magnified in a way that demonstrates you're stressed, and now you're talking to somebody who's happy and they're like, gee, why do I want to hear this? So what I close with your audience is always know what the emotions are in the space that you're in. And that goes for you, and it goes for the people's whose space you may be entering.
And that's not always easy to determine, is it?
No, not at all. And again, knocking on a door or saying to somebody, hey, is this a good time for us to have a conversation that's going to be fun? Or is this a good time that I need to have 5 minutes of some serious talk with you? Is this a good time or a good space? And I'll close it up by one of my first clients that I needed to give some serious feedback to. I realized that when I needed to give him feedback, I could not do it in his office. So I realized the space in his office was owned by his assistant. And she would feel that she could interrupt him 5 times in 15 minutes because she was going to run his office, and you could not have a 15-minute conversation with him in his office. So what I learned from that, if I wanted to have serious conversations with him, we went out on a Friday night and we went to his favorite pub, and he would have a beer and I would drink a club soda, and we would have some of the best darn conversations you could have. And so, and one other client, I was like, working with his team of people, the team would always call where he sat the king's chair. And therefore, I coached him into going into the conference rooms and city meetings, rotate your chair. And the first time his staff walked into the room and he wasn't sitting in the king's chair, I wish I had a movie clip of the facial expressions of the people that were doing that. So my close for you is always know whose space you're entering and what space you're giving out, because it's just that simple that you can have an incredibly powerful message or incredibly gift that you want to share or give to someone, but if you don't match up with the space in the emotions within that space, you can miss the whole mark, not because you didn't have the right message or the right plan, but because you just timed it in the wrong space.
Perfect. So, Tony Dottino, where do we find you if we want to know more?
Jen, we can have people go look at DottinoConsulting.com's website, and we've just done some refreshing and some updates on that. You can go out to find courses, and they can see all the different courses that we offer to our clients. And last but not least, there's a book that people just love called Grassroots Leaders, and they can order that off of Amazon. And I cannot tell you how many people have read that book, and I keep it by my side all the time because the tips in it that we put in margins and we put at the end of chapters have been invaluable, and I use it all the time. So there's at least 3 places. And then if anybody wants to come to next year's Memory Championship, they can go test USAMemoryChampionship.com, and they can find out all about how to be a mental athlete and have some fun in growing their own memory skills and being part of a fun competition.
Sounds great. Sounds like what I need.
Jen, anytime you and I can get on a separate call, and I'll give you a couple of simple techniques, and I promise you it will help you improve your memory.
Thank you. Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy life to jump in and help out the Careers by Jen audience.
Thank you so very much. And if I have done that, then it's been well worth the time that you and I have shared today.
Take care.
Thank you.
My conversation with Tony Dottino, and I hope you go to his website and check out the memory championships he was talking about and all the fun stuff. Apologies for the echo in the room. I think he was in a hotel room and there was no microphone available, and so the sound is rather reverberating there, but I hope that you could understand all of the value that he was sharing with us today, and I hope that you got a lot out of that interview. If you're still looking for gift ideas, come on over to careersbyjen.com and go to the online courses under training resources, and we've got a lot of courses there, and there are things that you could offer someone as a gift idea, a very green gift, because you wouldn't have to wrap it. And so check that out if you're still looking for gift ideas at this holiday time. And if not, I hope that you will enjoy more of the things that we've got on offer for you in the podcasts, in the Facebook group. If you haven't joined our Careers by Jen community, come on over and do that. I'm going to be doing a Facebook Live this week on how to say no and not feel guilty, if you are able to join us for that or take a look at the replay. Anyhow, lots going on. Until next time, this is Jen Swanson. Take good care and practice your emotional intelligence.